So before we begin, my name is Anthony Dijak. I am a high schooler here in Phoenix, Arizona, Desert Vista High School. One of my biggest passions is actually urban design and just urbanism in general. Everywhere like I look, I just think, oh, how this is so not efficient, or oh, this is efficient at like moving people, at really increasing connectivity, economic potential. And it's just something that I've really always been passionate about. Um, and so a lot of people at my school are also very passionate about this topic as well. So I created the organization Urbanist United, where I make Instagram posts and we have small meetings. We go to town council, the local Ahwatukee City Planning Committee, the town committees there, to really express what we want to see, the change that we want to see. And we just have a lot of conversations based on that. We've made city models as well with the before and after highway removal, for example. So it's just always been a very passionate topic of mine, and possibly even a career choice for me too. So, so yeah.
Hi. Oh, can I start with mine one?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Nikita Soni, and I'm from India. So I'm here from my master's study, graduate study in Arizona State University, specific in urban and environment planning. So this is my second master. So my first master is in urban and regional planning. So from that only you can, uh, like see that how I'm much more passionate about this urban planning scenario. But yeah, this is I'm over here is as a work studying as an international student, and it's been a great experience and a new kind of thing that I'm learning over here in the field of urban planning. So yeah, that's me.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Thank you.
I will go next. My name is Zacchaeus. Also a UEP student at ASU. Um, my journey with urban planning and urban design and urbanism started back in 2012 when I went to school all the way back in Brazil for a architecture and urban design um, uh, bachelor's degree. Didn't end up getting it, but I got my bachelor's in urban planning at ASU. So I've been studying planning and in the field of planning, you could say, since 2012.
That's awesome.
And now I'll go. Hello, my name is Jacob. I am from Iowa. And my sort of entry into urban planning, that space is pretty recent. I'm also an MUEP student, concurrently pursuing my master's in sustainability as well. My undergrad degree was in public health and statistics, actually, so not super planning related, although I would argue planning adjacent. But after I graduated from my undergrad, I was just working for like a small business in Iowa City, not really doing anything like related to my undergrad degrees. And one of my friends was like, "Hey, I'm moving to Arizona to do this urban planning thing." And I was like, you know what? I got nothing to lose. Let me get in there as well. And yeah, so far I've really enjoyed my experience and I've realized that, yeah, urban planning is something that I'm passionate about.
No, it's really cool. That's really cool. All right, let's see. So yeah, thank you for joining us to this first ever Urbanist United podcast. I just wanted to try something out, and we'll see how it goes. Um, so the first question I have really is, I guess I'll have you sort of explain your origin stories with urban planning, but what has really been the biggest inspiration in getting into the field?
So starting from my side, I had done my bachelor's in architecture, so I have that background of architecture. But working in a small scale is very different. But after completing my graduation in architecture, I mean to working as a lecturer in one of the prestigious colleges in India. But the thing is that I want to work with the neighborhood, and I'm more, interested in research and neighborhood and community planning. So working kind of a broad scale is in planning is always excite me to work with the community. So that's and uh, in the field of urban planning and architecture, it's basically my passion for sustainable design and a commitment to creating a impactful and a resilient urban environment. So I can say that's the inspiration me to do this masters. And as you know, guys, because climate change is very much hype right now. So urban and environment planning is, I can say, for me, it's a best field to explore my interest in research and with the community and neighborhood. So yeah.
That's really cool. It really is important to really develop these partnerships with communities for the future, especially of planning. I feel like a lot of people don't really realize the importance of it, but as long as everyone's involved, we can really create amazing stuff.
Yeah, that's true. And there are as per my interest, I'm much more interested in children and old age people, which are very vulnerable. I can say the vulnerable community in the neighborhood. So thinking about the people and making the cities, neighborhoods more people friendly. That's what I feel that I can do much more work for them. So that's the thing from my side.
That's really amazing. That's really cool.
Yeah, on my end, I guess I have a similar background from Nikita, as I started as a architecture student. It was architecture and urbanism, in Brazil. I started the program because I loved design and I loved architecture, and I never had thought of myself as an urban planner, as an urban designer. But in high school, I loved to doodle, and I would doodle in classes. It was my way to focus. A lot of people look at the teachers while they are paying attention to class. I didn't. I had to do the opposite. I had to get my hands busy, because otherwise my mind would just wander. And I started just doodling random stuff. And then one day I just started doodling in streets. So I would start creating streets networks, and I would build cities out of my doodles. So that's when that part of like the urban design started growing on me. And then when I started college in architecture, that just continued to happen. And in my first urban and regional planning class that I had in my second semester, is when I was like, wait, I can put some of this design passion that I have into more than just creating single buildings or small complex, and more have more of an impact on a general on a larger scale. And I think that the straw that broke the camel's back for me is that I used to live in a very poor neighborhood in my hometown, and there were some urban renewal projects in the pipelines for the revitalization of this area, and is a historic neighborhood. It's one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city, over 400 years old neighborhood. And when they proposed the project, it was to create 13 high-rise towers in a very low-rise neighborhood, dense, packed colonial neighborhood, but very low rise. Most buildings were 3 to 4 stories high. And when they decided to create that, there was a movement that we called Ocupi Stelita, which would translate to Occupy Stelita, what was the name of the neighborhood that they were trying to build those. And that was back at the time of the Occupy Wall Street.
Hmm.
To put into context, that's why we also called Occupy Estelita. And I was part of the group of people that occupied the place and barricade the place and stopped all the trucks and tractors from getting in and destroying part of our historic neighborhood. So that's when I saw the power that activism can have in urban planning. And that's when I decided to focus my studies more in urban planning than in architecture.
That's really interesting. That really is. There really is so much activism within urban planning. And I also do find that an interesting point that you brought up about really increasing density in neighborhoods that don't necessarily need to have that increase in density. For instance, I feel like in a lot of neighborhoods, we certainly do need to have more density just because we're running out of space in a lot of cities. But there is a really conflicting point as it's whether we increase density or we preserve the historic character of certain communities. And while I personally feel that preserving his historical character and the culture of communities is significantly more important, there really is a tough conversation to have, especially in places like San Francisco, where there's a housing crisis and a lot of people are proposing building high rises all over the city, but then that would disrupt the architectural heritage and also the architectural norms of the city. So that's really an interesting point you brought up because there's a lot of conflict about it, but certainly a discussion that has to be had.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot about is it about what type of density you want, right? There are several studies that show that you don't need high rises to have high density. So I think that's and the high rises are just the easy, simplest, lazy, quote unquote, way of bringing density. And there is a lot more ways to bring density without bringing high rises to historic neighborhoods.
I agree with you. And for a couple of weeks ago, I actually went to New York City, and it's really sad seeing how many historic neighborhoods were destroyed with these high rises, and yet they just sit empty. And they're essentially just used as investments from whether it's national or overseas buyers. They're just used as investments, but nobody actually lives there. And so even though we're building all these large skyscrapers, in effect, we're making the cities less dense and less populated while pushing people out. So it really is interesting how things that might seem, in a sense, good can actually have really negative consequences.
Yeah, totally. And I can say like my whole entry into the urban planning design sphere. So like even though I'm relatively new actually to like my studies in the field, like I can recall going to high school, like so my high school was located a half-hour drive away from where I physically lived, and there wasn't really an efficient way to get there. So I remember having to leave like an hour early um to get to school every day, which to me felt crazy because I'm like, I have friends in other states that like literally can walk to their high school. Like, why do I live in this area that's like very just doesn't have the resources it needs, I guess, or like, why isn't there a high school closer to me? So that's when I originally started thinking about it. And then, like, as an undergraduate student, I guess I really came in from the housing side of things. So my first year of undergraduate college, there was like an unprecedentedly high class at the University of Iowa. So like all of the dorms were carrying way more extra people. My room was supposed to be a double. It got turned into a triple. There were people living in like the student lobbies. Like it was just way more dense than the building was anticipated to be. And so I remember being like very frustrated that there wasn't enough housing in the community to be able to accommodate all these people. And that's something that sort of lasted throughout my undergraduate experience. You know, I was having to sign my leases for apartments like a year in advance just to make sure that I was able to actually get into somewhere. And in Iowa, tenants don't really have a lot of rights. So I noticed that the quality of my housing was very poor. Things that were broken weren't really getting fixed. Things that were like, I probably shouldn't have been living around in terms of like mold and stuff, like that wasn't really too much of a concern. And so while I wasn't necessarily like, yeah, I'm gonna study urban planning, yeah, I'm like really passionate about this stuff, I was like, okay, this housing is not adequate. Like people deserve quality housing that isn't, you know, so expensive. And like I was thinking about that. And then I think after I moved to Phoenix to start my program, that's also when I started using public transit a lot because in Iowa, you pretty much just have to drive everywhere. That's kind of how it works. So I started using public transit a lot here too. And I was like, okay, this is dope. Like public transit's really important. Like we got to make sure people have mobility options and stuff like that. So I think in my time here, I've also become a really huge proponent for transit options and multimodal forms of transportation, because that's something that's really important as well. So I feel like that's how I sort of got into the space.
Yeah, that's really cool. Also, AC has really good public transit. I feel like a lot of people don't realize like Tempe's have some of the best public transit, maybe even definitely in
I
the Southwest.
I mean, like for me, I'm over here, as an international student. But for me, in Tempe, the public transit is the best one, and maybe Jacob tells you the more about it because he's having definitely a good knowledge about it. But yeah, Tempe is awesome. While when it's come to the public transit.
I
Yeah,
agree. I do think we got pretty good public transit in Tempe, but it could be better. I'll say that.
that's true. That's true. Like when I go to the ASU campus, I know the streetcar, it's like if I miss the streetcar, I have to wait so long for the next one to arrive. And I feel like we could definitely increase the really just the speed of which when it comes and how often it comes. But it's still, I think, a great start. Like just the fact that we built it in the first place, and we built it pretty recently too. So I think
Mhm.
that's a great start. Really good progress.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the head start is the biggest issue with any public transportation in general. If you have to plan your trip ahead of time, there's something wrong with your trip. You should not have to plan for it. And this comes from somebody that for 23 years before I moved to the US permanently, I used public transit basically every day in my hometown in Brazil. And I knew that if I went to the bus stop, it would be between 5 to 10 minutes to get a bus. Doesn't matter. So I didn't have to. I love the tools that Valley Metro, for example, has for you to plan your trip. It's great that we have it, but we shouldn't everybody need it, right? I think we should have a tool because people have different needs and have different abilities. But transit would, for me, transit becomes efficient to the point that people will start choosing transit in first place, even those choice riders, as we call, when you don't have to plan your trip. You're like, I want to go from point A to point B. I can just walk outside and go to the bus stop, and I know that the bus is gonna pass soon. Not that I'm gonna go there and I just missed the bus and it's gonna take me 30 minutes, 45 minutes for the next bus to arrive. That type of friction is too much for a transit system that can be considered great. I think it's good the transit system in Tempe, but I concur with everybody. There is room for improvement.
Of course. And also, if it becomes the type of system where you have to plan the trip out, it, in a sense, really only becomes a commuter system that isn't the true public transit that we really want. Because I feel like in the United States, especially, a lot of these rail systems that we have are just in place to move people from the suburbs to the city back and forth. And it's really unlike the systems in South America, Europe, Asia, where you can essentially just hop on a train and go anywhere in the city, not just between the suburbs and the downtown areas. So I definitely agree that starting off with just having rapid service where you don't have to plan every trip out can really create that the true like community aspect of public transit and not just for it to move workers to and from two places. Let's see. Um, Another question I do have. All right. Are there any barriers within this industry, within this urban planning field?
So as my perspective, they just say that people are having a different need and different ability. So for me, urban planning is all about community and people. So when it's come to the public participations, I feel that it is a little bit difficult because everyone is having their different opinion needs, and sometimes as an urban planner to achieve everyone's opinion and to do work with the same, it's a little bit different. And there are various challenges also. It's include regulatory constraint, or sometimes the government is having a limited budget. They have to do so many things, but they just having the limited budget. But sometimes community oppositions, I can say it's kind of a barrier to this field. But yeah, there is certain way to, come out of it. But to, you can, for me, like, you can make everyone's happy. So for me, it's like, it's basic barrier, I could say, or challenge to, achieve the goal for everyone in the city. So yeah, for me, it's that.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. I didn't realize until I started, having work experience and stuff, how political planning is and planning decisions are. You could have so much public support for a project, for increased transit, something like that. But if the politicians in power don't want it to happen, then it likely won't happen. And I think a really good example of that is sort of if you look at a lot of the compromises that had to be made surrounding the Prop 400 extensions and stuff like that, you know, originally there was going to be a planned light rail extension that went to the capital so that people could take transit to get to the capital fairly easily, and that had to be scrapped because politicians didn't want the light rail going to the capital, even though that's a very popular thing. Lots of people love the light rail and ride it often. So I don't know. I think that's definitely a barrier. Like you can have amazing ideas that, are on budget, that are publicly supported and stuff like that, but you really have to be able to work with politicians and people at the top making decisions, because otherwise like that stuff isn't going to happen no matter what.
With how political urban planning really is, would you say that it's a lot more bureaucracy instead of actual planning in the process?
I think there's a good amount of bureaucracy. I don't think it's exclusively that. Like there is a lot of planning stuff that, you know, isn't subject to such scrutiny, but I think it's depending on where you live, where you are, what's exactly being proposed, like there is a lot of work that you have to do. So it can definitely turn into that depending on like what's going on. Like public transit in Arizona, yeah, that's something that's going to be very bureaucratic. You're going to have to do a lot of, talking to politicians, trying to find some compromise and stuff. But in another city, maybe that's not the case, and everyone's like, yeah, more transit, more transit, more transit.
Yeah, it really is surprising how political the process is. Like I used to think it was just like I would learn about people like Haussmann in Paris or what was the guy's name in New York City who just absolutely destroyed the city of highways. Like these people have so much power, and we think that, oh, urban planners, they can just a highway here, a train there, it's so easy. But it's really, really complicated, especially within the bureaucracy and the politics of it all.
Yeah, you're talking about Robert Moses, right?
Yes, Robert Moses. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, planning is very political, and whoever tells anybody that planning can be apolitical, some of our agencies in our county try to stay apolitical, but it's very hard to be apolitical while doing planning. It's a political exercise. But I do think that even though we do have a lot of political work while doing planning, I think most of at least my work experience has been more of a compromise more than a political aspect. I've worked with a lot of people that are not planners. So just imagine when you're trying to create a plan, and it's like a new bike lane or a new bike path. Um, you have to talk to the fire department. You have to talk about with the police department. You have to talk to engineering department, the streets department. So even though I am a transit planner trying to just create more active transportation solutions, most of my interactions that have that pushback and I have to find compromise are not really political because it's just other technical staff from my jurisdiction or from inter overlaying jurisdictions that have their priorities. Because when we're talking about fire safety, they're thinking about, can my fire truck now go through this street that you just removed 10 feet, 5 feet to put your bike lane, right? So I think there is a lot more of bureaucracy that is not political than we can think, than if first meets the eye when thinking about planning. We think about planning of just this political back and forth and this political friction, but there's a lot of friction and planning that goes beyond just the political, and it goes more of this technical issue. And I think that is the magic about planning, is that what we do as planners is bringing all of these people together to find a solution that can work for everybody. It's trying to create that bike lane in a way that the fire department can be happy about it, and they can attend to emergencies, right? We don't want to put a bike lane and be happy, look, we are bike friendly city, and then this bike friendly city now have fire departments that cannot attend to people in need, right? So I think that's the magic of planning, is trying to find that compromise that makes it works best for everybody needs.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it really goes to show just how important compromise is in planning. And that's really one of the core tenets of planning too. Just I feel like a lot of people don't really expect that, but that is really interesting. Since we are a bit short on time, I know the Zoom has like the 40 minutes feature now where you can't have meetings for more than 40 minutes. Um, so I have another question. I have really two really big open thought questions. The first one is, what are some of the biggest challenges in Phoenix, and how can we work on Phoenix? And kind of like a follow up on that, if you essentially had like the power to change anything in Phoenix within compromise, obviously, how and what would you do with Phoenix?
So for me, when I'm seeing Phoenix with my eyes, so the key barriers to achieving the urbanism include, the Phoenix is having a car-centric infrastructures, which is kind of a limited public transportations, though, Tempe is having the best, I can say, a good public transportations, but, somehow I feel the zoning regulations also, prioritizing the sprawl. And when I'm coming to the public transport, it is good. But when it's come to the streets are not that much safe. So there is a lack of emphasis on walkability and mixed land use planning. What is for me, it's been Phoenix is having a barriers and challenges. But to overcome these challenges, it's required a shift towards sustainable and inclusive urban planning, which was much more investment in public transit and like revisions the zoning policies to like from that you can promote the vibrant and pedestrian friendly urban environment in Phoenix. So if I have a power, so I can do things like that for Phoenix. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool. We definitely need to have the conversations on that change because with climate change, there really is a lot of change that has to be done, and it feels like it really isn't. But hopefully in the future, we'll have more conversations about that and actual change too, actual progress. Um, Anyone else have any other suggestions they would like to change with Phoenix? Something more specific,
This
something really
is
specific.
it. Yeah, this is a hard question. I have a laundry list of things that I would love to change in Phoenix, and it's not something that makes it bad about Phoenix, because I would have probably have a laundry list of changes to any city, even when we think about good urban planning cities like Barcelona, or New York. I would still have a laundry list of things that I would like to change in those cities. So it's a hard question, but I think coming from the transportation experience that I have as not just in the planning studies, but also as a professional as well. In my 4 years of working in transportation planning in the city of in the region of Phoenix, I would say just creating urban land use and zoning that is more beneficial for transit and other types of transportation that is not the vehicular transportation, so alternative transportation modes. And what I mean by that is just allowing ADUs, the accessory dwelling units, or allowing more densities in every neighborhood, allowing for mixed use developments. Because even though those are not transportation related projects, it's not something that I do as a transportation planner. I can see the impact of those policy decisions on the way that I can plan transportation and transit services for my population. So I would really see improvement on the quality of the environment, the built environment in Phoenix, and the quality of life of the Phoenix area residents if we could change some of those policies to include more alternative transportation friendly policies. And on that route, then if I had the power to do anything, would to abolish the single family zoning in Phoenix, and not just to allow anybody to build anything that it's not single family homes, because that's usually the policies that have been put in place. As we can see, for example, in the California example, that they just said any developer can now in any lot build more than a single family home, right? I would just, if I have the power in this theoretical world, I would go beyond and prohibit
Hmm.
the construction of single family homes. Not that I have anything specifically against it. I have something against the amount
Yeah.
that we have of it right now. Because if we look at any maps, we have way too much of it. So in order to counterbalance the years and decades that we pushed for only single family homes being built, we need to prohibit it for a while until we can go back to a more normal share of single family homes and multifamily homes so we can achieve that density and that alternatives for other types of transportation.
I certainly agree with you. We definitely do have way too much single family homes here. Since we're so short on time, very quick last question. I'm sorry you can answer that one, Jacob, but maybe you can with this one. Um, if you could give any piece of advice for anyone who's aspiring to go into this field, especially those in high school and members of the youth, what is your advice?
I think I'll answer this really quickly, as someone who didn't do planning and sort of found my way to it. I would say that like planning is something that like you can come to at any point in your life because all experience is relevant. I use my lived experience when I'm sort of engaging with problems all the time. So if you're unsure about planning and you want to try something else before maybe getting to that as like a career path or something, go for it because that's still going to provide you with a ton of valuable experience like in planning, like if you do something first. So that's what I would say.